Hi, AP Psych class. Welcome to your final installment of Unit 5 on consciousness. This is part 4 on drugs and drugs' effect on consciousness. And so let's begin with a discussion of dependence and addiction. First, let's do a definition of addiction. Addiction is going to be defined as a compulsive craving for a substance despite its adverse consequences. And so despite an individual consciously understanding that this substance may not indeed be healthy or good for them, still desiring use of the substance. Your book discusses what I find fascinating, right? The 3 myths of addiction. And so let's discuss these quickly, because I bet that some of these things, these very myths, might be things that surprise you, things that you've maybe learned previously in your educational career. And so the first being that drugs quickly corrupt. That's myth number 1. Okay, right? Like, you try drugs one time and you're hooked for life. That's not true at all. Some of the substances that we will discuss are more addictive than others physically. And so, please don't use this lecture as some by any means, me condoning drug use. All right. But some of the statistics to share with you, only 15 to 16% of individuals would report being addicted to cocaine after 10 years of use. And Gazzaniga did some work on this as well, and found that by age 35, casual use of illegal drugs tends to taper off. And so that kind of dispels this myth of, you use it one time and you're addicted and there's no way that you can, not use these substances casually. That may be a bit extreme. The second myth is that addiction can't be stopped voluntarily. And viewing it as some sort of disease, many psychologists believe undermines individual self-confidence and the will to change those cravings. And so think of that humanistic perspective that we discussed earlier in the class, and that this whole, like, it's a disease and you can't help it, you have no control over it, it controls you, really does undermine human will and psychological resilience and the ability to overcome these addictions on one's own. 41% of ex-smokers report kicking the habit all by themselves without the help of therapists or anyone else, or rehab, so to speak. And so that's a myth that needs dispelled. The third and final myth is that extending addiction to, cover anything that's repetitive and pleasure-seeking. And so, I don't know, it leads to a very fascinating discussion of what really constitutes an addiction. The classic example of a politician, getting caught in some sort of, sex scandal and claiming, I can't help it, I have an addiction. That's just not, it doesn't lend itself well to a discussion of choice and say in regards to, our willingness to do and not do certain behaviors. And so those are just 3 myths of addiction that we should dispel right off the bat. Okay, some terms that you're probably familiar with from health class: tolerance and withdrawal. Concerning drug addiction, right, tolerance is going to be the diminishing impact of a drug with regular use of the same dosage. And so larger doses are going to be required in order to for the person to achieve the same effect or the same high, right? And so what used to happen with just one use needs larger and larger and larger doses. There is one drug that we will discuss that defies this rule of tolerance, but all in good time. We'll discuss that later. And then withdrawal is just the distress or the discomfort as a result of stopping use of an addictive substance. Okay, so revisit those 3 myths. I mean, nobody said that stopping an addiction was easy, right? And that it would require a lot of willpower on the individual to stop the use. I mean, that's why they're addicted. And withdrawal tends to cause people to not kick the habit on his or her own. while we're on the topic of withdrawal, let's talk about this, this concept of addiction and withdrawal, right? We can have what's known as a physical dependence on a substance and a psychological dependence on a substance. They can occur, one or the other or both. Right? Physical is the actual cravings. And so when we talk about physical withdrawal, we can talk about the actual physical pain that a person experiences as a result of no longer having the addictive substance in their body. When we talk about psychological dependence, we're talking about the learned behavior. Like, why did they turn to the drug use? Was it as a means of escape, right? As a means of dealing with stress or eliminating negative feelings? And so, that's the habitual element of addiction, right? Part of the problem of addiction is just in breaking the psychological habit of using, like turning to the drug when things get stressful or things get bad. Okay, so to continue on here, we won't spend a lot of time on this because we're going to do some work with this in class, and I'm guessing a lot of this is review from the health class. But when we talk about the psychoactive drugs, right, we can divide them up into 3 categories, right? Depressants, stimulants, and hallucinogens. Okay, depressants are going to be your alcohol, opiates, barbiturates, right? These are going to be things that calm neural activity, slow down the body's nervous system, slow down our reactions to things, right? Like, for example, some people talk about, like, to link this to earlier parts of the unit, some individuals talk about, if I just need a glass of wine to fall asleep at night, or a beer to fall asleep at night. Bad idea, right? Because alcohol, being a suppressant, means that it's slowing down nervous system activity, which, you guessed it, means that it's suppressing REM sleep. Remember that during REM stage of sleep, your brain is highly, highly active, but it can't be highly, highly active when there is a depressant in your system, right? And so alcohol suppresses REM sleep. It leads to memory disruption, decreased self-control, right? And so remember, it's slowing down, right? Opiates, same thing, like slowing down neural activity to the point where they often stop the production of our natural endorphins, which can make the physical addiction to opiates even stronger than maybe some of the other drugs on our list of things to discuss. Okay, our stimulants, right? Those are you guessed it, the ones that speed up the nervous system, right? Caffeine, nicotine, any of our amphetamines, cocaine, ecstasy, methamphetamine. So increased breathing, higher heart rate, higher energy, higher self-confidence, decreased appetite as a result of this heightened nervous system activity. They can also dangerously stop the production of our natural dopamine, which means that sometimes serious addicts have recoveries that are, like similar to somebody with Parkinson's as a result of going through the withdrawal. And, we can get into some social debate on the legality of these drugs, but there's no point, right? In that nicotine, a legal substance for people in our country ages 18 and over, is just as addictive as cocaine and heroin, right? And so that's all like the goodness and badness of these is all socially constructed, right? Really all bad concerning putting foreign substances into one's body. Okay, and so a lot of these work by speeding up the nervous system, and a lot of them do double duty by preventing the reuptake of specific neurotransmitters. It's just how the nervous system gets overly excited, is because it's being bombarded with more amounts like of dopamine or serotonin than it would normally be. Okay, your hallucinogens, primarily marijuana and LSD. Marijuana and LSD are antagonists for serotonin. So remember that antagonists block the reaction of specific things versus an agonist being something that speeds up or mimics a neurotransmitter. And so remember I had said that there was one drug that would defy our rule of tolerance. Here it is, marijuana. THC, the chemical in marijuana, can stay in your body a month or longer, and so it contradicts that building up of a tolerance like the other drugs do. it mimics receptors for pain, and so it stops neurotransmitters from attaching to the pain receptors, which is why, there are a lot of advocates for medical marijuana use, and that it can help alleviate pain, in a lot of, like cancer patients, for example. All right, so some influences on drug use. And again, it's never one or the other. It's a combination of all of these items, right? Biological, right? There is a genetic link to addiction. Remember, we talked about the hypothalamus as the pleasure center in the brain, and the size of the hypothalamus in rats led them to, be more likely to cross that electrified grid to receive, the stimulation to their hypothalamus. And so, there is a biological predisposition to addiction. Addiction can run in families. We also know that there are personality connections to addiction, that risk-taking personalities tend to be more likely to have addictive tendencies, and therefore more likely to be develop that psychological dependence on a drug. Psychological, right? Stress can lead to drug use. Failure can lead to drug use. Feelings of hopelessness or worthlessness, low self-esteem can lead to drug use. Cities tend to offer more opportunities for drug use. So like socially, where you live could impact whether or not you become addicted to drugs. Young people are more susceptible in that they may use drugs as a way to gain social acceptance, right? Strong religious beliefs can often prevent people from experimenting with drugs, which in turn would stop addiction. And so, the influences on whether or not an individual chooses to use drugs, is multifaceted. It's not just one answer or another. Okay, so bring any questions that you have regarding drugs and altered states of consciousness with you to class. And as always, thanks for listening.